And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage-porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Well, here at our new studios at coalitionradionetwork.com, high in the hills over Providence, La Prov, the naked city, the city of, well, about 300,000 or so stories. We're going to tell one this morning. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us, where links can be found, well, to just about everything you need in life, including, I think, one of the more provocative ones, a radio conversation that we had, it's got to be about 4 or 5 years from now, when we engaged in what we call Coalition Radio 2.0, when we were on WPRO AM 630. It's called Why You Need to Join the American Civil Liberties Union. It was a 1-hour fire-ranging conversation with Stephen Brown, who had joined us for the very first time. We talked about the history of the ACLU. We talked about, well, how it at times managed to upset yet support everyone in their pursuit of life and liberty, and particularly with regard to, well, areas that you would consider conservative politics, areas that we consider liberal politics, and everything in between, because ultimately the ACLU is, despite protestations, amazingly enough, from each side at various points in its history, is, I'll call it, political party blind. It's an adherence to civil liberties, not the institutions that play in the backyard of civil liberties that are important. And on that note, we've had a successful run over the number of years of having folks, corresponding attorneys for the American Civil Liberties Union, Mr. Brown, a variety of staff members in to discuss issues of the day. Full disclosure, I am the chairman of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party, of which is a distinct separate effort. But as you can imagine, as a result, my attention to this issue is keen. Joining us, I think for the first time, via the miracle of IP, is Hannah Stern. She is with the Rhode Island chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, and we're here to discuss, I think, one of the most oft-discussed tabletop conversations, if you will, around Rhode Island homes everywhere, is when we have that Zoom camera on, just what can they see? Hannah, welcome to the Coalition. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Now, this is not the first time you folks have subjected this issue for analysis. As recently as 3 years ago, you folks did an in-depth analysis of what was then looming on the horizon, and that was, of course, privacy issues around remote learning and school systems and, well, young people in general. What were your findings then?
Yeah, so in 2017, our organization did an open records request with every single school district in Rhode Island. This was as Chromebooks and remote and using school-loaned computers and school-loaned devices as a component of education was really starting to take off, and you were seeing more and more districts using it. To me, it's always kind of shocking. I graduated from high school not even 10 years ago, and I didn't have a single class that used them. So the rate at which these have been appearing in classrooms it's at a fast clip. So a few years ago, we did an open records request and asked for all of the privacy policies that schools provided students when they were using these school-owned computers, and asked for copies of all of the agreements that parents were signing, asked for copies of what the school permitted themselves access to on these computers. And what we found was really shocking. So almost every district in our last review in 2017 allowed themselves pretty unbridled access remotely to the contents of the school-owned computer, whether that be just the data that's on the computer, the files that are on the computer, emails that are sent, and most concerningly, the microphone or camera to these school-owned devices. The thing that's really crazy about that is that concerns about access to the microphone and camera are unfortunately not hypothetical, although we don't know of any instances of this happening in Rhode Island. In Pennsylvania, about 10 years ago, there was a really famous case where a school district was actually found to have taken over 50,000 surreptitious photos of students in their homes and their bedrooms using these school-loan devices. So it really is a problem. It's something that students should have at the bare minimum of protection for, to make sure that when they're doing their schoolwork, there's not more intrusion than necessary on the part of school officials.
That's appalling.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's just think about on a really practical level where the average home computer is. It's typically in a child's bedroom. Despite all suggestions to the contrary, years ago the big move amongst parents was to put it on the dining room table or in the dining room or somewhere where there be some level of parental supervision. I think that ship has sailed quite a while ago.
Yeah.
So you've got not only the prospect of direct intervention through chat rooms and messaging, but you've got the unintended consequence of your home literally being wide open. And by the way, just anecdotally, Hannah, I've had conversations with 3 or 4, I'll just say public area school teachers who are still in a sort of state of shock as what they've seen happening, not overtly in the homes, ironically, that they're looking, because remember, this is a two-way. This is, as they say, bisynchronous communication. You're both sides are seeing things they shouldn't, and you've got teachers who have seen now students in what are potentially compromising situations, and the legalities and the potential. Is this a case where whereas so often happens with technology, is that the implications and the realities of it are way beyond school departments' missives and bureaucracy and State Board of Eds and all that? Are we just hopelessly behind in that?
Well, I think it's concerning on a lot of levels, and bringing it back to our current situation where all schools are closed and we're engaging in virtual learning. We had happened to file a subsequent open records request this February, which is what our most recent project was based on, which asks for the most recent policies to see if since 2017 schools had updated any of these privacy policies and put in stronger protections for students. And then it just so happened that almost right after we got all of our responses, all of the schools shut down because of the COVID-19 crisis, and all schools transitioned to virtual learning. And so this became even more of a concerning topic for us because, again, we found, similarly to 2017, very few school districts really afforded comprehensive privacy protections or limited remote access to these devices. I think if we're talking about the range of implications that this type of privacy encroachment can have, it's very broad. It's not just about the students anymore. If you have your school-owned computer in your house 24/7, then that gives you access to your family's sensitive information potentially. If students or their families are encouraged to use these devices for non-academic purposes, which some districts do, that can be especially concerning, especially during a public health crisis where people may be looking up sensitive health information or maybe looking for more information about medication or maybe looking up information about unemployment. And all of that is really sensitive information that really has there's no reason why a school should potentially have access to that pretty indiscriminately.
Right, because ultimately you've got a variety of communities here in Rhode Island where folks are facing income challenges even before COVID, for whom this school computer may be, in fact, the only smartphone / computer / device in the household at all.
Exactly, yeah.
And on one hand, the blessing of that is that I think we all understand and that there are, as I said to say at times, it's very expensive to be poor in Rhode Island. And so all of a sudden, it just is. I mean, so access to the internet and the electronic gateways for a variety of goods and services render them more affordable, potentially more private because you're not using mail communication. So there are so many upsides to it. But the downside, of course, is that, as we all know, you've got tracking issues. Something as simple as when these devices are turned in, have you found many comprehensive school policies for scrubbing them? Does that even exist?
That's a good question, and I'm not familiar with that. That would be a really good thing for us to follow up on. But I do want to briefly talk about something that you just mentioned, which is the tracking, which we actually found when we were doing our most recent look through of these policies that only 2 districts in all of Rhode Island explicitly state that they will not use the tracking the tracking on these computers or devices for just remotely tracking the location just because. Instead, it's limited to instances where it's reported stolen or other situations like that. But that's another huge issue. We shouldn't be using these to track the locations of our students either. So there's a whole host of problems, but that would be a good thing to follow up on the how these computers are treated after a student turns them in. That's an interesting question that I don't have an answer for.
You've also got the specter of that you. The analogy Trojan horse is apt at a number of levels, but professional education programs, and full disclosure, my wife is a teacher here in the state of Rhode Island. It doesn't matter where, but she's a teacher. And so, over years, and she's been a teacher for 30 plus years, so we've seen the advent of this software. The actual, forget about the computer and the generic operating system, whether you're using Chrome or Firefox. I doubt many school systems are using DuckDuckGo, which is probably the only true operating system that got really protection. Not thinking that's happening much. Maybe EG, but but you've also got the software that's being disseminated being an information collecting tool as well. So, and I'm not going to name names, but educational. I think we're all aware in the new millennium that software developers obtain funds through a couple of funnels. Obviously, one of them is selling the software. The second one, of course, is selling information that is collected during the use of that software. And it may be seemingly innocuous. For example, they might be registering performance, if you will, on a variety of math tutorial programs as a way of measuring their own performance, but also selling that data to other organizations who are also looking to do topside analysis of school student performance at different levels. Well, whatever, it's people are just mining this data. It's a secondary flow of income and sometimes critical. Is there any state mandate against authorized software being installed by school systems on what data they collect and distribute? Has that been covered at all by school systems?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and this is another huge area of concern for us because, especially over the last month, where so many schools across the entire country and in Rhode Island have transitioned to virtual education for 100% of the students' academic engagement. Mm-hmm. We've also seen a lot of these schools turn to, as you're referring to, these third-party platforms which facilitate online learning and which facilitate virtual learning and allow for teachers to communicate in different ways with their students. And this is a really interesting issue. And actually, there are some very unique implications in Rhode Island because we do currently have a state law which bans commercial sale of student data that is produced exclusively through an educational context. So, for example, all of the data that would be produced online by a student exclusively because they're a student. So there is currently a ban on the sale of this data for commercial purposes in Rhode Island, which is very unique, and we're really glad to have this law. What another really important component of this legislation or of this law is, though, is and one of the things that we've asked districts to comply with in the letter that we just sent to every district is that this statute also requires that all third-party platforms, so all third-party data computing platforms or software, enter into an agreement with the districts that they're contracting with, that they'll comply with the provisions of that statute. What we've asked is that every district sure that they're receiving an agreement from all of these third-party platforms that they will not be using student data for commercial purposes, especially during a time of crisis, especially during a time of emergency, especially when all of this data is being produced only because students can't go to school because there's a public health crisis. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the really big asks that we've made, and one of the things that we consider to be one of the most important student privacy issues that we're facing right now. The other facet of that, which is a component of these software programs, but isn't necessarily related immediately to the data that these programs can collect and sell, but just the really invasive features that can be a part of these third-party programs. If they're being installed without being properly vetted, because school officials need a way to communicate with students outside of school, we understand the need for these emergency programs and for these emergency steps to be taken so that students can still access their education, but it's entirely inappropriate to be utilizing third-party platforms that also enable school officials to see, for example, the entire browser history content of a student's personal computer or their family's personal computer that is so beyond whatever a school official would need to collect to ensure that a student is complying with their academic requirements or complying with their education. And also real-time access to the student's computer, that is also as concerning. What we've seen is that there are some districts that actually have been enabling these third-party platforms beyond the hours of a normal school day, which again is really inappropriate. It's like you said earlier, if this is the only computer that a family has and they're using the computer outside of what the typical school day is to look up medical information or look up unemployment information or look up information for services, this is information that is not necessary for the school to know and is actually inappropriate for them to have in their possession. So those are two really big issues that we've seen arising from the usage of these third-party platforms and software. I'm sure it's not exclusive to these two problems, but these are just the two that we've identified in the midst of this public health crisis that we really hope that districts will immediately address and take into account.
Hannah Stern is joining us from the Rhode Island chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. Is an organization, particularly after the events of these past few months, when we recover, one of the first things you should do is actually just join, because I'm not aware of any organization. There's some wonderful community organizations in the state. Common Cause pops up right away. But from a perspective of your civil liberties, your right to privacy, and your right to live an existence, if you will, that's interference-free from government, and someone who's acting as a watchdog in some rather unique areas, they are the champs. On our website is a white paper recently published, and we'll share it again, by the ACLU that on a national level discusses the implication of cell phone tracking, particularly in the age of COVID. Something that folks are talking a lot about, but there hasn't been a lot of real research on. This white paper covers a lot of that. Hannah, who in your mind, we've only got a couple minutes left because she's got to go to a meeting, but in your opinion, is this something that should be occurring at the statewide level at Rhode, or is the implementation of it really the responsibility of the individual school districts?
Well, we're hoping that each district will really take accountability and responsibility very quickly to act and respond to these requests. We have been pushing for the last few years, although, of course, the General Assembly is indefinitely postponed now due to, again, the COVID outbreak. But we have been pushing legislation for the past few years, which would introduce very comprehensive privacy policies for school loan computers so that there isn't this patchwork implementation across the districts, and you don't have students in one district who are protected from having their camera access, and then you have students in another town who have zero privacy protection. So we do think it's really important to have these comprehensive protections. Right now, we're asking the districts to act quickly just because we think that that's the most effective mode, especially during this emergency crisis when we need very fast action. So that's why we turn to them. But our next goal, and one of our goals since 2017 when we did our initial review, is really pushing the General Assembly to recognize the importance of these protections and asking them to make sure that students are legally and comprehensively protected from any potentially invasive, from any potential invasions of privacy on the part of schools and school officials. We think it's really important. We think it's one of those aspects of student privacy that's unfortunately overlooked, but we also think it's really critical. Just because we haven't had a case in Rhode Island doesn't mean that we won't in the future have an issue where a student's private information is really inappropriately and horribly exposed. It's really important to prevent that from happening, and especially to make sure that while students are home 24 hours a day, quarantined with their families, that there's not even the option for any sensitive private information to get in the hands of people who shouldn't have it to begin with. So this is a huge issue for us. We hope the district will do the right thing, but we also hope that after this crisis is over and after schools are able to reopen, that the General Assembly will recognize what a pressing issue this is and pass the piece of legislation which we've been pushing for the last few years.
No, absolutely. I fear, unless you're either a civil liberties geek like I am, or you happen to have someone technical in your household, I doubt many people have read a terms of service. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
So if you've actually taken the time to read one, and that's that little fine print in the little pamphlet that's published in 3 or 4 languages, which is usually taped in the back of the box, or when you just click at 3 a.m. because you really want to download that software. All right, it's in there, and by law they will tell you it buried in there exactly what they're going to do. It's kind of like when you sign the privacy statement at a car dealership. We call it the lack of privacy. But anyway, but most people I don't think are even aware of the potential. I mean, I'm just going to leave folks with one tip. If you walk by and the little white light on your cam is on, guess what? It's on. And
that is a very helpful tip.
But and in final thoughts, but it's quite frankly the most egregious issues aren't somebody watching you on your webcam. Quite frankly, it's data mining your family purchases. Mm-hmm. It's data mining medical issues, and then you've got the bad actors, and they're data mining, whatever they can find. And it's remarkable how lazy some companies are in leaving things out there. That's why you hear about, they're very often called breaches in security. Quite frankly, it's usually just an open door. So I applaud your efforts in this. This is one of those issues where if you allow yourself to just roll your eyes and say, it can't happen to me, yeah, about that. Let's double down. I have a feeling most of the actors on the stage, if you will, doing large-scale implementations for government are reasonable companies. But again, in a situation like this where brevity and speed of installation trumped everything, I don't doubt that there aren't more than a few open doors in homes around Rhode Island. So again, thank you so much for joining us. I know this is a hectic time for you folks. I hope you'll join us again here on the show because this was very, very informative.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun to talk about. So thanks for having me. We hope to talk to you again soon.
All right. Hannah Stern, she is with your Rhode Island American Civil Liberties Union. You need to join. And of course, there's a link right on coalitionradio.us why you need to join the American Civil Liberties Union. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network here at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio on the Mighty Mighty Twitter, at coalition_radio, and of course coalitionradio.us, where you can find an entire blog called Civil Liberty Blog dedicated to the work of the American Civil Liberties Union and some similar organizations. We are going to have this up on the website. This was a remarkably quick segment. In terms of 25 minutes, blew right by, but this was jam-packed with good stuff. So we will have this up on the website. We're going to take a break for a little while right now. We have some evening programming scheduled. If you're listening now or you listen to this in the future, just need to go to coalitionradionetwork.com where you can find what we got coming up tonight. We've got a brand new minted candidate, Judge Jim Gray. He is a new candidate for the Libertarian nomination for the presidency of the United States. If you are again, a freedom geek, if it's something you care about, Judge Gray has been intimately involved in the war against the war on drugs with an organization called LEAP. He has been the vice president's candidate before. It should be proved to be very, very interesting. We've got candidates all week. And then I believe in one of the most important segments that we're going to be carrying forward. Luis Daniel Munoz, a doctor in Rhode Island here, former state candidate for governor, is going to be talking to us about public health care in the age of COVID. That's going to be about 7:30 or so this evening. Again, look to our schedule at coalitionradionetwork.com. Thanks, folks, for joining us today. We will be back soon. Thank you.